Okay, so I went into my file cabinet where I have copious notes. I have notes on almost everything, and I was looking for something in grammar that I haven't yet talked about. There were a few things, and one of those is the verbal. What you see here is an actual photo of my notes, so if you don't mind, we'll just use the photo and go over it. Okay, a verbal, we are told, is a verb form that function as some other part of speech. Now here's a regular verb. I run 2 miles every day. And here's your verb. Okay, it's very simple. Now when you get to the infinitive, you have some slight changes. Okay, your verbal in infinitive form will act as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. So here's a sample sentence. For exercise, he likes to run. So here's your infinitive, but it's acting as a noun. So it's a verbal, it's not a regular verb. It's acting as a noun. In this sentence, you see you have a subject, a verb, and direct object. You have your subject, verb, and direct object. This infinitive is acting as a noun, and the noun is acting as a direct object. Okay, then the other verbal is the gerund, which acts as a noun. The sample sentence is, running makes him tired. Running is a verb form with an ing ending. Okay, we call it a gerund, and it's acting as a noun. In this sentence, it's also the subject. Running, you see the subject makes him tired. Okay, then we have the verbal called the participle, and that functions as an adjective. The running water from the natural spring is refreshing. Okay, we see the ing form. We know it's a participle. It's not a regular verb, but it's a verbal. It's a participle, and it's also acting as an adjective, or nowadays we might call it a noun complement. All right, so you have your infinitive, gerund, and participle, and these are called verbals. Let's look at different examples. Okay, for the infinitive, you have Mary wants to teach. To teach is acting like a noun here. In the gerund verbal, you have Mary will soon discover that teaching is challenging. Teaching here is acting as a noun, not a regular traditional verb. And in the participle verbal, Mary earned a teaching degree. Teaching is functioning as an adjective, or you could call it a noun complement. And you see that the modification or the complementation is going forward. We call that cataphoric. In other words, teaching is modifying degree in the forward direction. Okay, so you understand that? That's kind of simple. You say, I get it, that's easy. But what if you hear somebody say something like this? This is where my study started. I heard something like this and I thought, wait a second. Is that really a verbal? What is that? The woman teaching French is my cousin. Okay, woman, subject, verb is, subject complement, or you used to call it a predicate noun, would be my cousin. But what about this teaching French, especially the word teaching? Okay, what do we have? Well, we see it's not an infinitive. The word to is not here, all right? And we see it's not a gerund. It's not really functioning as a noun here. So could it be a participle? Could it be an adjective or a noun complement? Well, in today's modern contemporary grammar systems, we could call this teaching French a noun complement. People would say, oh, well, that's a noun, woman, and teaching French is your noun complement. And the complementation is going backwards. In other words, teaching French is complementing backwards to woman. All right? So I heard somebody say, the woman teaching French is my cousin. Then I thought to myself, well, I've heard this structure before. And here are other examples. For example, the boy mowing my lawn is my nephew. You have the same situation here. the team scoring the most points will likely win the game. And the gold buried in my backyard is worth millions. Now here you have the past tense verb form, but that's okay. It's still doing the same function as these other words here. It's still doing the same thing. But really, what's it doing and what is it? Does it fit in the verbal category? Does it work? Okay, you have a noun and an adjective, all right? And that adjective is modifying backwards, so we would call that anaphoric, right? Now, you could cheat. When you're analyzing and studying, you can cheat. You can say, oh, I can fix that. I'll just say, the French teaching woman is my cousin, and I'll fix that. And here we'll have just a plain and simple adjective, or you could call it a noun complement, and then your problem is solved. And the complementation here is going forward, so it would be cataphoric. You say, well, I fixed that. The French teaching woman is my cousin. But I say, no. When you were listening, you heard the person say this. You heard the person say, the woman teaching French is my cousin, and you heard it in that order. So you're saying, okay, what's the mind doing here? What is this word teaching, and what's really going on? Okay, so questions are raised. For example, how does a dedicated predicate-based verb, in other words, a regular verb, become a verbal? How or why did its functions change? All right? Now also, the question would be, if a verbal modifies or complements in one direction, how can it do so in the other direction? How can it be cataphoric and then be anaphoric? All right? And then another question would be, is there something in the mind that naturally and automatically performs all of the steps required to ultimately yield an utterance that is as precise and swift as possible? In other words, the brain must be moving at a speed faster than light. It must be moving at the speed of thought, because this happens so fast. It's just incredible. So let's go down here to another photo of my notes. So we have the original problem and the original questions. The woman teaching French is my cousin. So what do we really have? Well, this is why I make videos, because if you watched any of them, whether it be videos on grammar, electricity, or music, you know that my thinking's different, my perspective's different. I have my own system. I have my own mind. So let's use my mind and see what we get. Okay, I speak of three levels in sentence structure. In other words, in syntax. There's the genuine level, used to be called independent and traditional. The synthetic level, which in traditional grammar you might say dependent. And then there's the elliptical level, and that's where you omit things. In other words, you make the sentence shorter. You make it more concise, quicker, right? So now here, the word teaching is at the verb level. Let's start at the basic verb level. The woman is teaching French. Okay? Now, is teaching is your verb phrase. That's the present progressive tense. But teaching here is a regular verb. Now, in my system, genuine means it's complete in itself. It can stand alone. The woman is teaching French. That can stand alone. Then you have another thought. The woman is my cousin. That's a genuine statement. That's a genuine clause. It can stand alone. So the thing is, what happens when we want to combine these two genuine clauses into a thought, into a sentence? All right? Well, this is where my idea comes in. I don't know if I invented it, but I'm the only one I know who talks about it. I call it the abstract proform. Abstract means pretty much it comes from the unconscious, or you can't see it, and you don't necessarily grasp it in the beginning, but it's there. It's underlying. And proform means a proform is something that stands in for, it takes a place of reasonable implied content. In other words, it stands in for something that's implied and it's reasonable. In other words, it's useful. So here we have the woman is teaching French, all right? But we want to omit the period and the words the, woman. These two words, we want to omit those, right? So we have the woman is teaching French. We do the omission, and we have is my cousin left over. So you see, now we have a synthetic situation. Synthetic means the pieces or fragments referred to must be joined to something else. And we have an elliptical element here because we did omission, right? So we have synthetic process going on, and we have elliptical. That's how my system works. So now we have the woman who is teaching French is my cousin. And how do we get that in the mind? What did the mind do? Well, it inserted reasonable implied content. That's what my abstract proform is. It took this out and put this in so that it makes sense. But you see in this sentence, is teaching is still a regular verb, right? It's not a verbal yet. So in my system, which I teach in my other videos, what you have here is, because you have the omission and the insertion, all right, you end up with a distinction phrase. Now that used to be called relative clause. People still call it that. That's a terrible name, and I fixed all that. You can see my other videos. But the point is, now we have a genuine clause here. It can stand alone. The woman who is teaching French is my cousin, all right? So now we go back to the elliptical level of omission. When people speak to save time and energy, or maybe they're just lazy or stupid, they'll say something and they will omit words. The woman who is teaching French is my cousin. Okay, that's how far we got. All right? And the teaching was still in the verb form. But now here, because of omission, all right, in the elliptical state of mind, we're saying ultimately the woman teaching French is my cousin. Because in the mind, in the brain, we just cut that out, just chopped it out. And now finally, you have the word teaching is at the verbal level, because all these transformations took place. All that stuff happens in the mind, and it's so fast that it's just unbelievable. It's truly, it has to be faster than the speed of light. So now we finally have a verbal, and we see how we can have the verbal behind the noun instead of in front of it. My system here, my system with these concepts of genuine synthetic elliptical, abstract proform, and the omission process tells you and shows you clearly how this can happen. It tells you how you get there. Right? So then finally, we have our original sentence. The woman teaching French is my cousin. When we hear it, we know what she means. But now structurally in the mind, from a grammar perspective, now we know what's going on. So we conclude, we have a conclusion. In a traditional sense, teaching is a participle. All right? Teaching French is a participle phrase. That's not too complicated. Teaching is a participle functioning as an adjective. We just saw that. Teaching French is an adjective phrase. In other words, it's a phrase. It's more than one word, right? French is the object of teaching. Teaching French modifies the word woman. All right, we get all that from what we just learned, what I just showed you. And the direction of modification in this case is anaphoric. In other words, it refers backwards. So in the contemporary modern sense, in the very modern sense, especially when you're talking about the internet, we see that teaching French could be referred to as a noun complement, right? It complements the word woman. You can see videos on complements all over the internet, and that'll explain that. And you can see it in my videos too. I explain it probably more thoroughly than anybody. French is an adjective complement. French complements the word teaching. You see that? It complements the word teaching. Now, the direction of complementation is anaphoric, all right? It goes backwards. And that's pretty much it. So I know it's a little weird, but when I look at things like the, let's say the traditional relative clause or the traditional absolute phrase or the traditional noun clause. I see it totally differently, and I explain what the elements are in each structure. I explain it thoroughly in my other videos, and in this case I tried to do the same thing. I tried to explain how the verbal can exist in many different ways. All right, and that's about it. So thanks for being incredibly patient, and I hope this helped understand the verbal if you had a little trouble with it. All right, good night.